Mike will be driving this conversation. Very interesting topics on the table today, Mike.
Yes, quite a number of interesting topics. But before we get to the topics, let me introduce the panel that we have here this morning. And I'll start with a lady, and that's Dr. Nancy Booker, who is the Assistant Professor of Multimedia Journalism, Graduate School of Media and Communication. Good to have you.
Thank you.
We also have Eric Odur, who's the Secretary General for KUJ, Kenya Union of Journalists. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Lastly, we also have Professor Michael Wainaina, who is a political and educational blogger. Good to have you with us as usual. So this is the newsroom, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. First of all, a disclaimer. I had actually arranged to have two ladies on set, but Koki was not able to make it for reasons that she was not able to overcome. But that's just a disclaimer, because I know there's been claims that we have a habit of having manels, which is male panels. But that's also a discussion of what we're going to have. But let's start with something that has been on social media, and this was what was being called Nipashe na Uhuru, where we had journalists who had an opportunity to have a one-on-one with the president, and there has been a lot of talk around it, given the fact that they were not able to literally get some very hard questions across to the president and get some answers. But let me start first of all by hearing what your take is. Ladies first.
Thank you, and thank you, Michael, for starting with me, because oftentimes most panels start with the men, which was something that I was going to talk about, because it plays a lot into, how a panel discusses a particular issue. So I'm glad that you have started with me. I am of a different view. I watched Nipashe na Uhuru, and I'm glad that you call them journalists and not young women. Our young ladies, because a number of people on social media have said the young ladies were not able to do a good job.
Although they are young ladies, I mean, is there anything wrong with calling
we
them
never
young
say
ladies?
Young men. We never qualify that. We usually just say reporters or journalists. But when it comes to women, there's always that connotation. Why must we say that? Why don't we just say that they were reporters or they were journalists? So in this case, the female presenters, who also double up as anchors, I believe they did a good job. I watched it. They asked some of the tough questions that was in everybody's mind. I remember the first question was, them asking the president, why are you angry? And that's a question that has been playing in everybody's mind. And, that was a good point, a good starting point. They asked him several questions that any journalist, male or female, would have asked. And so when the whole discussion is now focused on not what did the president say and not say, and how did the interview turn out, it turns to, there were young ladies and they were, giggling and they were mesmerized by the fact that they were at State House. They were awed by the president. I think that is being very simplistic, taking the argument away from, the fact that, one, we must appreciate the space that has been opened up for journalists to be able to access political leaders, to be able to access the presidency and be able to interrogate him and his office on issues that are of, public concern. I think we need to appreciate that. The fact that, they are able to have access to him and provide a platform for him to be able to articulate his issues is a gain. We have not had that in a long time. In the previous dispensations, that was, almost like a no-go zone. And that is something that we need to appreciate. How we have used it and the challenges that come with that space is something that we need to debate. We can discuss. But taking the argument away from, this is an important milestone, that, we have that access, and two, that women reporters and journalists are also able to get into that space and ask questions and interrogate the presidency is in itself a gain. So when we belittle that and focus a lot more on the trivialities about, them being young and, them giggling and, being mesmerized by the fact that they were at State House, I think for me is being a little bit too simplistic.
Okay. Eric, do you feel that this possibly would have been handled different by the masses had it been male journalists? Because like Dr. Booker says, one of the things, that has been said on social media is because them being, I'll use what she doesn't want me to use, young ladies, the fact that they seem to be awed by the president, this possibly may have been coming across by virtue of the fact that they were ladies. Do you think if they were men, handle it exactly the same way, the response would be different?
I don't think if the response would have been different because, first of all, we have to look at the Nipashe, how it is planned. And I don't think these journalists who are going for a hard interview, the way you would have it probably for Citizen at 9 or at 9 o'clock news. Mm-hmm. So given that it was an early interview, actually you expect it to go that way. So I think these journalists did a good job, only that people must also understand that when you are going for an interview, there is a way you want this to be. There is a number of issues you want to look at. So they wouldn't have looked at it differently even if it was a male journalist or a male journalist who are interviewing the president. Because I also believe that there must have been also a lot of planning and a lot of discussions that were going on between royal media and the newsroom, and even discussing the areas of the topic. Mm-hmm. And I believe that these journalists also, they had something they also wanted to the public. Probably they wanted to look at, they wanted a light interview with the president, not hard interview with the president like it would have been at 9 or any other time.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's something that we also need to discuss here for the benefit of the public. What goes into the planning of a show like that? Because obviously for you to sit at State House and interview the president, there has to be a brief.
Exactly.
In fact, that was going to be my take, Michael, that we are probably reading too much into an event that is typically stage managed. From every angle imaginable. And it is not only, it is not stage managed for the benefit of the interviewers, it is not stage managed for the benefit of the public, it is stage managed for the benefit of the interviewee. And therefore, look at just the fact that the interview is in State House. You are in his house. You are in his stuff. And however tough you want to be, that does something to you, whether you are male or whether you are female, that does something to you. It's very, very different from having Uhuru Kenyatta here and interviewing him here. This is your tough. You're used to the environment, you know how it works. There, he's welcoming you probably with a cup of tea. You want to be in your best behavior because you're being hosted. And therefore, we are reading too much in an event which is too scripted. And if the journalists or the young ladies, they are young and they are ladies, did enjoy themselves, or if they didn't giggle, or if they did giggle, or if they did whatever, I think they were trying to make themselves comfortable in an environment that was alien to them and in a setup that was heavily stage managed against them.
All right.
Picking up from what Professor raises, I mean, when we need to qualify what's hard, in this particular case. They asked the questions that even if it was a male reporter sitting there, those were the same questions he would have asked. Mm. They asked the president questions about, why do you come across as angry? Why is it that when you are in the coastal region that the governor did not have access to, the event? Those are questions that any journalist, whether male or female, would have asked.
And that's what the public would.
And that's what the public
would like to know.
And they had sections where they were even taking questions, asking people to send their questions or what they would want the president to address, and they were asking, those questions. What makes an interview hard? Is it
in fact,
the
that's
tone?
what I was going to ask you. What is a hard interview?
Is it the tone that you then use to ask the questions or the approach? And we must also appreciate that, that there are gender roles also, that when, the same question being asked by a man and woman would come across very differently. Issues about tone and the approach that doesn't make it less of a news story just because it is being asked by somebody else of a different gender.
Yes, Prof.
Just picking up from what she's saying, that they asked the right questions, okay? They asked the right questions according to who? Because, like I told you, this is not an ad hoc event. This is not an event where you pick up a call and say, can we come in here? Okay? I don't think it is a coincidence that the country feels that the president is angry, and then citizen Nipashe does an interview where the question of his being angry is asked. Okay? It's not a coincidence, right? These people picked these vibes and realized the president needs to explain himself to the nation, and he needs to clear up some of these anger things and some of these questions. So let us ask ourselves whose narrative was being pushed in that Nipashe thing. From where I'm seated, I'm convinced that this was a state narrative, and they did very well in pushing it.
In pushing it, okay.
I don't think so. I think, and I also don't agree with Prof that that interview was stage managed. I think what happens is that there is always, in any interview, there must always be discussions prior to the interview, or prior to the day where when the interview is going to be carried out. And I think the discussion is always around the topic. What are we going to discuss, so that you can prepare the interviewee, so that if the interview comes to the interview, at least he's informed on the subject that we are going to discuss, so that he can, if there is need for research, the interview can do research. And in this case, the questions also come from the recent events. And some of the recent events that were actually in the news were the president being angry, and the president using some probably unpalatable words and when referring to the opponents. So I think those are the things that actually ought to have come from that interview. I don't expect journalists to just to come with questions from nowhere. The questions must come from either case studies or events. Exactly. And I think they did so well by looking at the recent events and asking questions so that the president can clarify and give answers to those questions.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, even in an interview situation, there is an agenda. We cannot assume that you get into an interview with no agenda. You are in place of the audience as the person who's, as the host of the interview. You're saying, we have this person, on set. And this was a case where they had an opportunity to promote the show right before it went on air, that today we are hosting the president, the head of state. And, we'll be asking various questions. And the way that we approach interviews is, if I know that that's the person that is coming in, as an audience, I have certain questions that if I was there and I had the opportunity to ask the questions, I would ask them. But now, since I'm not there, I am assuming, and I am hoping that the host of the interview will ask those questions that I would have wanted to ask if I had the opportunity. And that's the way that we approach interviews.
Yes, so, and that is granted, but maybe the feeling is coming from the fact that, yes, you have asked the right questions. You have asked the questions that possibly are advised by what is happening, but we do know that most PR gurus or politicians will give you what we'd call a politically correct answer. And the follow-up maybe is what would determine whether it is a hard interview or whether you have actually followed up on that question. For instance, if you asked if I'm angry and I tell you, well, everybody gets angry, I've not really answered your question. So a good journalist would follow up and say, look, you have not answered. But Prof, you wanted to say something?
Yes. One, it would be incorrect for Nipashe people to promote the program by saying that they are hosting the president. They should promote the program by saying that they are being hosted by the president in State House. Those are two different things. That is number one. Number two, we had a situation here where somebody needed to give answers more than somebody needed to ask questions. I don't know whether I am making myself very clear. It is the president who needed an opportunity to respond to issues about anger, about the language that he has been using. And he got the opportunity to do that. The issue was not about the questions that were asked. The issue was about the answers that needed to be given, and the answers were given. I think that it was a smart PR move. I think that it met its objectives as far as the people who set it up is concerned. As far as I'm concerned, in terms of communication, it was a perfect move on the part of State House.
Okay, I want us to move on, so I'll take one more comment from you. I want us to
I
move
think
on to
you
something else.
also need to inform the Prof that the State House does not belong to Huru. That belongs to the presidency, and therefore these journalists were not hosted. These journalists went to the State House, and they interviewed the president. I don't imagine that Professor expected that Uhuru Kenyatta was going to the studio to start being hosted. Yes, he can come to the studio, but you see, at that time, but you see, it has to be a place where it's open for any other media houses to go there and interview, because we are not expecting that probably, what I think people should be discussing right now, that they are expecting the president also to be interviewed by other media houses. I think that should be the discussion. That yes, he was interviewed by Nipashe team, then probably next time he should also, exactly, can also be now to be interviewed by the Morning Express. That should be the debate. Then we can now look at the 2 interviews or the 3 interviews, then compare and look at how did the president fare in this interview, how did he perform in the other interview. Then we can compare those and then come up with the conclusion that yes, the president has been carrying out PR exercise, or the president actually has been talking to the public as he has been interviewed by the journalist.
Okay. All right, I want us now to move on, and I know that's one that we can continue for a while, but let's also look at something that happened this weekend. There was the arrest and charging of Cyprian Nyakundi, a blogger, and of course we do know that blogging has become a space which it's changing the media terrain in terms of getting information, in terms of accuracy of information. But let me start with a blogger, and that is Prof. First of all, on your feeling and thoughts of what happened, and whether that's a good thing in terms of now trying to finally maybe have some discipline in the area.
I am not sure that there is indiscipline in the area, or I'm not so sure that there is more indiscipline in the area.
If there was no indiscipline, would not have somebody charged in court and convicted.
It is true, but we've had journalists charged, or people who are in media charged before and convicted. The fact that he is a blogger, to me, does not make the case any separate from any other case of libel or defamation that has been there. Is there a case, though, to be made for blogging as an area that is emerging in media and bloggers as content developers? Yes. Is there a need, therefore, to talk about questions of regulations and discipline, as you would call it? Yes. I have been one of those people who have said that the media is such a strong entity for it to be left unregulated. It's a huge area and it's a controversial area, but I think the more the power you have, the more responsibility you should have in exercising that power. There are countries, for example, Michael, that have passed regulation, and people would say this is gagging, or people would say this is censorship, or people would say whatever they would not say about it. But it tells you where blogging has gotten into. There are countries that say, for example, if you have a blog that has more than 3,000 visits per day, you must register yourself as a media outlet. So you are at the same level with KTN, with Nation, with whoever else disseminates news. And that tells you how powerful this blogging stuff has become. And therefore, the need to make sure that the power that comes with it is not misused. How that happens, though, is a discussion that we can have.
Okay. Dr. Booker, the space being opened up and the fact that your take on what happened.
I think, one, we must appreciate the fact that, you know, that space has been open. And so as a result of that, you have very many players, many of whom, you know, have no journalistic knowledge. You know, they don't come from that, you know, that background of having, you know, appreciated the fact that, you know, I have access to so many people, and, you know, the more followers I have, or the more people who read whatever it is that I post, then the more responsible I need to be, because then this has implications on public opinion. It has a lot to do with how, you know, I am an information source. And so with that, that's the difference. And then again, in media houses, there are all the checks and balances. You know, there are people who look at what you have done. You know, your stories have to go through a process for it to, you know, to be published. And so some of those things then, you know, if you're not doing the right thing, would be checked and corrected. It's a very different situation when you're looking at bloggers. For many of them, you know, they come up with whatever it is that they want to post and they upload it. I think it's time that we looked at, you know, how do we, one, empower bloggers in such a way that they understand that, you know, this is a platform, you know, and I am an important player in the media equation in this country, and that comes with some responsibility. And so building their capacity to be able to understand that, you know, that is there. And it doesn't have to be them coming into a classroom setting. I mean, I think we can be able to use the same platforms that they use to be able to help them understand the responsibilities that come with the fact that they have very many followers, and that in itself calls for some discipline.
All right, Eric, in terms of responsibility and possibly whether that responsibility should be left on the hands of the blogger.
No, I think the bloggers must also understand that as they probably inform the public, as they say, they must also be responsible in what they do. Look at the case of Nyakundi, for example. Actually, right now, I think the sentence was about contempt. I think the case is probably still going on. And look at how it has been, because I think there was an injunction that he was told that, okay, please stop publishing this information pending the determination of the case. The guy went on and on and on and on. Then the guy was told to go to court. He didn't go. So, and I've seen even that happening to the newspapers, whereby people go to court to stop publication or airing of a given story. And newspapers and television stations or radio stations, they stop that. But in this case, this blogger went on and on and on. And that's what we are saying, that people must be responsible. The kind of excitement we see in social media and in the blogs, I think that's where the problem is. Yes, fine, these people play a critical role because they look at some of the stories that they ordinarily, due to some interest, the traditional media or the mainstream media are not likely to handle. And therefore, the public expect them that they're going to play that role. But when they are doing that, they must be responsible. They must also know that there are limits. There are laws actually that are also governing, because the same defamation law that is being used to charge bloggers is the same law that is used to charge journalists or media houses. So that's where the balance is supposed to be. Fine, you need to play a critical role of informing the public, getting information that actually must have been left out by the mainstream media. But again, please try to be responsible. That's how they need to strike that balance.
Okay, Prof?
There's another angle that I like to highlight when I'm talking about blogging. And this is the angle of young people out there who want to be bloggers, because I get these inquiries every other time from young people who come into my blog, and they will look at the blog and they will say, Professor, I would want to have a blog like yours. So that one of the things that we need to appreciate as the so-called, I wouldn't say pioneers, but as the people whom the younger generation is looking up to as they want to get into blogging, is understand you carry a responsibility of setting the pace for a newer generation, for a younger generation of bloggers. And one of the ways in which I encourage these young people, I tell them that, number one, a blog is about content. If you do not have content, then you won't have a blog. A blog is not a technical thing called a blog and a URL. It is, do you have something to say that you think that people should listen to? You cannot start a blog to be a nuisance. And sometimes when some of these people are a nuisance, young people misinterpret what a blogger is supposed to be, because they gain notoriety by being a public nuisance. But I do ask young people to have a long-term view of blogging. Can you make a career out of it? You can make a career out of it. But like all careers, it takes time, it takes consistency, and like she's saying, it takes a bit of skill. So if you do not have this skill, or if you do not have this expertise, it is skill and expertise that can be acquired, Over time, if you feel that you need to go to a writing school, to take a writing course, or you take a journalist course, it is always helpful for you to have some of these skills that will take you that little bit further than somebody who doesn't have this kind of training. But my biggest responsibility as a blogger is to be a role model to a new generation and to set the pace for them and to help them to become successful bloggers.
Okay, Dr. Buka, and just as you come in with that, there's something he's brought in which is important, and we do have now the likes of Prof, who possibly younger bloggers would look up to, but now when it comes to the university and the education space, do we have something that guides bloggers so that they're not, like what he calls, just a nuisance? You're not just there to make noise that is irrelevant.
That's actually what I was just going to talk about. The whole question of within the training institutions, where have we placed blogging? I think traditionally it has been viewed as the space where those who cannot fit within a structured news environment then find their space to be able to articulate whatever it is that they want to. So the buck also stops with us in training institutions, that we need to, first of all, appreciate that this is can turn out to be a career path for certain individuals who may not necessarily find their place in a mainstream media organization. And once we appreciate that, then ensuring that it is part and parcel of the curriculum. Most of the curriculum that teaches journalism and communication in this country haven't included blogging as one of those avenues that you can actually be able to use to channel, information. But then again, even as we do that, I think there is need for a lot of mentoring for the young bloggers. There's also the need for us to help young people understand that, there is a difference between just posting something on the social space and blogging. I think oftentimes the way that blogging has been approached is, just as we would do our other posts on social media, some of those things that we do not have the capacity to say, in an interpersonal setting such as this one, that we then hide in some of those spaces where, we can say it as it is. But the more followers you have, the more that you make it a very active and a continuous source of communication and information sharing, that you're going to get followers. And it is important then that you do that with a bit of discipline going forward.
All right. I want us to also look at something here and maybe get your comments. There's an article that was written last week, and it has been written by Rasna Wara, and the title is "Male-Dominated Media Have Done Little to Promote Women." Let me start again with you, Dr. Buka. Male-dominated media have done little to promote women. Just that title, even without reading the article. Your thoughts on that?
I think we just need to look at who are the managers and the decision makers in most of the media organizations in this country. And truth be told, they are male-dominated. And that in itself then presents a challenge. And I think, that's not the first piece that we are seeing about that. I think Peter Maura, did a piece about, us not having very many female columnists in the papers, that most of the columns where opinion is sought is mainly dominated by men. So if you have a situation where you have at the top, at the decision-making level, you have more men than women, then that is likely to play into, the daily operations of media houses. Okay.
Eric, do you feel that that's a valid argument?
I think I'd have said before that for the many years I've been in the media, I've never heard anywhere whereby news is decided, or articles that go into the paper are decided based on gender. Because I think the articles that go into the newspapers or probably aired by TV or radio are actually based on if they are newsworthy. And so I think the issue is not about news managers being men or a newsroom being dominated by men. That is the reason why we do not see more women in newspapers or on TV or radio. I think what we need to look at, how do we probably come up with a deliberate move to reach out to women so that they can give them coverage. Because I think that's where the problem is. By nature, it is sometimes very difficult for women probably now to compete with men for the space, especially in the political arena. And you see, like, Kenya is a highly political society whereby politics actually dominate our news headlines. So given what happened in politics, probably what we need to look at, how do we make level playing ground in the politics so that we can have more women also playing a role in the political process so that we can also get more coverage. I think that is how we should look at it. But in terms of decision making in newsroom, I've never heard anywhere either written on a written directive that news should
or
be
even
decided.
practical.
Exactly, that women are not supposed to be given coverage.
And it's good you've come to the political space, but I want to bring in Michelle before we go into that. And the reason why I'm saying it's good you've come to the political space, there's also an idea of how we view even the women politicians. And I'll come to that, and in regards to how we cover them, the kind of coverage you give them. But Michelle, maybe just to get you to weigh in on this, and also if there's any feedback.
All right, let's begin with the feedback on social media, most of it touching on the two ladies, two journalists interviewing President Uhuru Kenyatta at State House. So some of the comments coming in here, we have at Steve Njugs says, the ladies showed respect, and that goes with interviewing the president, as did Kai Kai. It's very hypocritical to reduce their work to terming them as just ladies. And then we have Boge Petro says, media guys need to know that we are bored with the repetitive question. That interview was stage managed. And then we have Sina Pata Poter here says, the president never gives interviews. This was definitely staged. And then there we have, those are pictures of the interview there. And then we have Matthews here, it says, it's derogative to insinuate the interview on Nipashe was stage managed. We, the consumers, got the answers that we wanted. So that's the feedback from Kenyans coming this morning. Very mixed reactions, though. There are some tweets I really cannot read out because of the derogative terms they're using to describe these journalists. But moving away from that and focusing now on the space of female journalists in the media. Not very long ago, the Media Council of Kenya did give a report on gender balance within the media. First of all, like Buka said, he did say, male journalists or men are 10 times more likely to be featured as news sources than it is for the case of women. But it also further came to say that, especially when it comes to print and newspaper stories, 72%, or at least print stories, mostly use 72% of men as their sources. And we have a few pictures there of the article that we're talking about. But even more importantly, the report found that media organizations don't have a media strategy that could sort of create a gender balance, such that there's a likelihood of some gender balance in your news sources themselves. So, if I'm using 4 sources, it has to be 2 women, 2 men. There is no such policy within the media. So, in a way, it is correct to say that the media, which is one of the institutions in Kenya that have really tried to highlight the plight of women, is also an industry that has really sidelined its women in society.
I think one of the things that we need to appreciate is that women are a lot more careful about their media engagements than men. They are a lot more cautious, before they appear on camera. Look at, last week when we had the State of the Nation address, and KTN went out to ask the man on the street, what do you expect? It was very difficult to find women, being interviewed or being sourced. So it points to, one, that they are very careful about how they engage with media. And so it means that right from the media house's point of view, from the reporter's point of view, that you then have to be very intentional, in including them in that space.
Allow me to pause you there, because I think we even had a challenge, and you've talked about the State of the Nation address, and Michelle was in town, literally looking for people and what they feel about the State of the Nation address. And I remember even texting her at some point and saying, can we have some women? What was your experience?
It was extremely difficult. One woman, I told you, Michael, told me her husband would not approve of her giving comments on national television, and every woman was just not receptive at all. The only people who stopped were men. And not very long ago, I think it was end of last year, we had a lady who started the hashtag Say No to Manels, the use of all men panels. And the reason for that is because they say you cannot express the frustrations of society through a male perspective only. And they criticize the media for the argument we give that it's difficult to get women to come to studio and give their views, but it really is. Unfortunately, it really is.
Exactly, and actually I was happy to hear from Dr. Buka when she says that women are usually very careful when they engage with the media. And I think that's where the problem is, because before they appear probably on TV, leave alone the newspapers, or even for their pictures to appear on the newspapers, they'll ask a lot of questions, and probably there are a lot of things they need to do before they appear on TV and also their pictures to be taken. And I think that's where the problem is, and we need now to come up with some deliberate interventions so that we can see how we can bring more women to the media. But again, the media is just a mirror of the society. They say the society, because if you look at probably some of our boardrooms, look about the CEOs, you realize that majority of them are men. So if you are going to cover company A, basically whoever is going to address the media is a man. And you'll find he's seated there and flanked by fellow men who are addressing the media. So it's difficult for you now to go, where are you going to get a woman to put on the board or a parastatal for that woman to address the media? So we must also look at this as a problem we have as a society, that every organization is dominated by men. So whenever they are engaging the media, it's the men who are engaging the media on behalf of those organizations.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Both of you have mentioned something common, and that's a deliberate attempt. And maybe we'll need to find out what is that deliberate attempt, especially given, like you've mentioned, for a lady to appear on a newspaper, unless you've taken a shot while she was not aware, she will tell you, no, the hair has to be this. I mean, they're more careful.
I think the care is not just about appearance. We'll need to talk about, why are they, what are they careful about?
Let me hear from Prof first, because I could see him nodding his head.
Nodding my head in disagreement. Michael.
In disagreement to what exactly?
I am always sensitive to an argument that blames the victim. And we had this argument earlier on in the morning, where Kenyans have been held hostage by corrupt state, and then they blame the people. We cannot blame the women because of results of marginalization, systematic and structured marginalization over the years. Of course, you've heard Michelle saying that a lady is concerned that they cannot appear on television because their husband is... Those are social cultural structures that marginalize women and make it difficult for women to participate. I have said here before that what women, empowered women and men of goodwill need to do is to teach women language of power. Women need to start speaking the language, because right now, and Daktari has said that even when women find their way into the media, they are more careful, okay? Because women have not been socialized to speak the language of power. Women are relational. Women want to sustain peace and to sustain relationships. And in a society that defines power differently, in a society where power is adversarial, then women come into that space already disadvantaged. And that is why, one, I have argued for gendered voices as opposed to gender balance. We have had situations, Michael, where we have invited women, and those women have not been necessarily helpful to the gender argument, okay? And we were pursuing balance, but we didn't get the voice. Or we were pursuing balance, and we got muted voices. So that these voices do not necessarily have to come from women. It is desirable that they come from women, but it is not necessary that they come from women. I would work with women who are empowered, with women who are exposed, and with men of goodwill to start teaching the next generation of women how to speak the language of power.
Okay, Dr. Buka, is it an issue of not speaking the language of power?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define power, and is it soft power or hard power? Women, well, soft power is also power, so it just depends on which one you'd want to use to to sell your ideals and to get the message across. I think when we talk about women being careful about their engagements, it's not just about their appearance. There's a lot, women are judged a lot more harshly, and they're, that within society there are all those checks and balances. There is your spouse, that you want to, run some of those things about, before you actually go on set. The times that some of the programs, like some of the panels are constituted also does not work for women. If you have a panel as early as 7 o'clock, like this one, and you have another panel, a live panel at 10 o'clock in the night, you're not likely to find, women finding that, a good time, because they have family obligations, they have commitments at home that they would need to attend to, they have children that they would need to attend to. What are we talking about being intentional? I think one of the things that we can do is, one, seek them out. When we say that most of the boardrooms are male-dominated, why don't we then intentionally seek out some of those women, because there are women who are in boardrooms, and several of them, women who are economists. I have watched some of them on television, and I'm awed by, the way that they're able to articulate the issues, so that when we find them, we give them that space. We invite them as much as we can and provide that space for them to be able to articulate their issues. That way, then, it helps other women to be able to see that they can actually be able to get there. Secondly, if the timings of the shows do not work for them, because we must appreciate that they have other things that they have to do. It's easy for a man to get out at 5 o'clock and be on a panel at 7 a.m. Is it the same for a woman? No. She has to be able to get the kids ready for school. Why don't we then have some of those segments pre-recorded at times that is, flexible for them to be able to do that? About sourcing, as we go out to look for our sources, being intentional means that you are aware that there is another voice, that hasn't been heard. And I think oftentimes we aren't. We have multiple sources, we are good to go. But being intentional means that you ask yourself, wait a minute, have I heard the voice of the woman? And I agree with Prof that yes, it doesn't have to take a woman to articulate the issues of women, but it gives it more credibility when you have a woman speaking about issues of women.
All right, Eric.
Just to add on to what Buka has said, I think the issue of being deliberate with it is very important. But it's also good to see that women are now taking this. There's been so much lip service about women empowerment, but they're now taking this on their own and taking it to cyberspace. Because now that hashtag, Say No to Manels, isn't just a hashtag. It's a forum. They have a whole website where more than 400 women now have signed up. Women who are specialists in different fields and different industries. And so anytime media wants a woman on their panel, they can log on to that website and find more than 400 women who are willing to come to the media and give the voice of the women. So I think it's a great initiative there being carried
Yes,
out.
I actually agree with that, because personally I've always felt that the gender debate had been hijacked by the elites. And that's the reason, probably the reason why we're not having more women coming out to probably participate in these talk shows, and also to see many faces of women in the newspaper, because probably there have not been proper structured mentorship for women, and also to encourage them to be on the media, because we've seen other women have done well. How come that instead of seeing these numbers increasing, then actually they're diminishing? So probably I agree with that in such initiatives, so that we can always have women readily available to participate in these shows, because I don't think it will be practical that you want a quick reaction, or something has just happened and you need a quick reaction from various people. Then you delay that, because there is not a voice of our woman. Exactly. So I think what we need to do is we need to come up with the intervention to make sure that at any given time there is always a voice of a woman who is ready to be out there to be listened to.
Okay. All right, Prof. As we wind up.
Yes, I generally agree with the sentiments here. But from a political angle, from a political point of view, that's why I was saying that we cannot avoid the discussion about power, because it is important who holds power and in whose interest that power is being wielded. The article that you have referred to was talking about giving women space. That is not the language of power. You are never given space. you take it. And I am happy that there is a forum that is now becoming proactive about making sure that women come out and take their space. And this is what I mean by the language of power. Power is not given. Power is taken.
It's taken. All right. Lady and gentlemen, we'll have to wind up right there. And that is where we will wind up Newsroom. Michelle, any feedback or comments that you'd like to close with?
Yeah, a lot of feedback coming in this morning. And we have Audrey Rendo here saying it's called the male gaze. There's still so much that is left to be done to change the place of women in the media. And Gushu here says a panel arguing that women are underrepresented because they're too careful about media appearances. And Lucas Gaga says if a lady is not ready to be on TV, why force them? Don't you think it's better to let people find their own value? All right, so that's some of the feedback coming in. And then we have, with regard to blogging, Simon here says, as an information science student, blogging is taught under electronic publishing. That is Morning Express, Katie. And we do thank you for your feedback. We take a short break here on Morning Express. Remember, for those on